John Calipari says that he's got some tweaks coming to Kentucky basketball's rotation to throw at opponents in the NCAA tournament. And I agree. I think Coach Cal needs to make some tweaks to this team, but it's not the ones that he's talking about.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing John Calipari's comments about some tweaks he wants to make to the rotation in the NCAA tournament. Also going to be discussing some other tweaks that I think Coach Cal should be making, specifically with the guards and how they operate in his system. And then finally, we're going to take a look at Kentucky basketball's region, and we're going to ask the question, what would have been the easiest possible path for the Kentucky Wildcats? What would have been the easiest seeds that they could have seen in their region? And talk about maybe some breaks that UK got in their portion of the bracket. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. If you have not subscribed to either the podcast feed or the YouTube channel, wherever you are tuned in, first of all, really appreciate you watching and listening. Subscribe. It's going to be a very fascinating week here for the Kentucky Wildcats. Now is the perfect time to join up. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more, and new customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. You can just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And before we get started here, just to kind of preface talking about NCAA tournament stuff, been reminding you guys for about a week now, if you click the link in the description on YouTube here or on the podcast feed, you will see a link to join our ESPN Bracket Pick'em Challenge. I believe we've almost got 100 people in there now, which is just insane to think about. Last time we did this, we had 50. We've doubled that up. Would love for you guys to join. Just go click. It's free to join. Just submit your bracket. And maybe if you win, maybe we'll shout you. Oh, actually, no, I will shout out the winner. Maybe shout out the top three here on the show. So go check it out. It's super awesome to get to do this with you guys. And yeah, go click the link in the description. Go fill that out. So John Calipari has some tweaks that he may want to make to Kentucky basketball's roster and their rotation heading into the NCAA tournament. As we all know, Kentucky has struggled this entire season on defense. If you go and look at KenPom, my favorite website in the world, you can look at adjusted offensive and defensive efficiency, two really important statistics for historical national champions. And if you look at Kentucky's defense, it's not all that great. The Wildcats currently rank 108th in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency. They are top 5 in offensive efficiency. But Kentucky at that 108 mark is not particularly good. In fact, a lot of history says the Wildcats are probably not going to make it to the national championship and win it with a defense like that. They can definitely make the Final Four, but to win the whole thing, they're going to have to buck some trends. Coach Cal has been asked a lot about this defense, obviously, about what they can do to change things, and he said in a recent interview that he's got some tweaks that he may want to make. Here's a direct quote from Coach Cal. Quote, "I've got a couple of tweaks in mind if a team has guards that break us down. What else can we do? How about if I put both 7-footers in? It may take away a little offense, but now you've got 2 7-footers. It's a little harder to score at the rim." End quote. I'm not going to bash this because I think on paper for the Kentucky Wildcats, this makes sense. This is a roster that has struggled all year long protecting the rim and getting stops consistently. They have 3 different players listed at 7 foot tall or taller, 7 foot, 7'1", 7'2", and they have not been able to consistently execute around the rim and prevent scoring. I think a lot of it has to do with less about the height, more about the want to, and more about the physicality of these 3 big men that Kentucky has. All 3 of them are relatively slender to some degree. Ugonna Onyenso being the thickest of the group, and I think being the most effective rim protector, although not consistent against certain matchups this season. Kentucky does not have a ton of options that are effective. On paper, they've got options, but in reality, they really don't have a lot of guys that can do it with any sort of consistency. So Coach Cal saying, let's try putting in 2 7-footers to maybe take away some stuff at the rim. This is not a revolution. This is not something surprising. This is not anything special. This is, if you don't remember, if you weren't watching the show, if you weren't following along last offseason, this is something he said very, very early last year in the offseason. It was like late April or May where he talked about there could possibly be 2 7-footers in my rotation, in my starting lineup, if I feel like it. And that was supposed to be Aaron Bradshaw, Ugonna Onyenso, teaming up down low and suffocating opponents offensively. As we just discussed, neither of those guys have been exceptional at playing good defense so far this season around the rim. So talking about this as if it's a tweak, as if it's something that you can change and then expect a different outcome, or at least hope for a different outcome, I don't think that this is going to change much. If anything, there's a legitimate chance it could hurt Kentucky. As Coach Cal said, it may take away a little offense, and it absolutely could. Of course, the question that you have to ask here is whether or not you value the offense that you're currently getting at your 4 position with a Duthiero or Justin Edwards or what have you in the rotation. I personally would go with the 3-guard lineup of Reed Sheppard, Rob Dillingham, Antonio Reeves, and then put your 2 7-footers in, Ivasic, Onyenso, Bradshaw, whatever rotation there you want to put in at the 4 and the 5. This will not really matter at the end of the day, in my opinion, though, because I think teams are going to score at the rate that they have been regardless. And I continue to say here, Kentucky is not good at protecting the rim. And anybody that watches them would understand that. And obviously you've been watching them all season long, and you know Kentucky struggles with it, despite some statistics that may say otherwise. According to hoopmath.com and according to Ken Pom, Kentucky is really, really good at blocking shots. The Wildcats, according to HoopMath, are 13th nationally in percentage of shots blocked at the rim at 15.8%. According to Ken Pom, Kentucky is first nationally in just block percentage, period, blocking 16.1% of shots. That's very, very high, and that is good. But as I've continued to say here on the show, and I've continued to make this argument for what may be the better part of 2 years, just because you are a good shot blocking team does not mean you are a good rim protecting team, especially with the style of play that Kentucky basketball has thrown out there so far this season because of these statistics right here. According to hoopmath.com, Kentucky's defense is 260th nationally in field goal percentage at the rim. It's right under 60%. If I'm not mistaken, it's 59.9, 59.7%. That is not good. That is in the bottom third of the country. Kentucky blocks a ton of shots, but they also are very inefficient at protecting the rim at the same time. Opponents only take 36.2% of their shots at the rim, by the way. That's also in the bottom third nationally. So opponents aren't really hounding Kentucky at the rim. They're scoring their points elsewhere, which just really shows you just how flawed this defense has been as a whole this season. So you may say, Lance, how can Kentucky block such a large percentage of shots, but also give up such a high effective field goal percentage, or just such a high field goal percentage at the rim, period? And a lot of it, again, like I just said, has to do with their style of play. Kentucky plays faster. It gives themselves more possessions and gives the opponent more possessions. If you are giving up a high field goal percentage or even an average field goal percentage on defense, you are going to give up a lot of points if you are giving them more possessions to do so. You can be statistically inefficient and get more possessions and still score more points because you're just simply getting more opportunities. If you shoot your clip, you're going to get more points than you do on average against a slower-paced team. Makes sense? With a team like Kentucky, sure, you can block a ton of shots. You can reject a bunch of different possessions. But because you're adding on those extra possessions by playing so fast on offense, it kind of cancels itself out in a way on certain matchups, and I think the statistics reflect that. So Kentucky, good shot blocking team, not good at the rim. 2 7-footers in this rotation. I don't think it's going to change a ton for the Kentucky Wildcats. I really don't know if this is the tweak that Coach Cal should make. Personally, don't know if it's the tweak that he should make, but I think that there are other tweaks that Kentucky can make to this roster that I am almost positive will produce not just good results, but great results. Before we dive into what those tweaks may be, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. Each week, we are picking one team that stands out, a team that has pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The Yukon Huskies can only be described as an armada. This top-seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there. It's no wonder why they've landed the top overall seed in the NCAA tournament. They're one of the favorites to win it all, despite 4 of the 5 Power 6 conference champions standing in their way in the East region. It is an insanely loaded region, but teams like Yukon, which can only be described as a Nissan armada, can power through just about anything. You can take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can shop all of these different SUVs at nissanusa.com. That is nissanusa.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live television. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're gonna wanna have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, and it is all for free. That includes all of us here at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up on all of the latest happening in the world of sports. You can check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices, and if you haven't checked it out, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. That is amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Want to remind you guys again, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already or the podcast feed wherever you are tuned in, please go ahead and do so. And if you have not joined the ESPN Bracket Challenge, it's free. It's going to be a lot of fun. 96 people in there last time I checked. Let's get it over 100. Would love for you to go in there and compete, see if your bracket takes the cake among everybody else's. It's going to be super fun. Join up. So, we talked about Coach Cal's tweaks that he may want to make. We talked about how it may not really matter based on the way that Kentucky's played this season. We talked about the stats behind those 7-footers and how this team has protected the rim. And now I want to talk about a tweak that Kentucky, I believe, should make. And if you're watching on YouTube, you see the names of the 2 players here that we're going to discuss. Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard should start for Kentucky. I don't really think that there's a whole lot of math or stats or vibes to really back up a differing opinion strongly. We have seen time and time again Kentucky basketball fall behind early in games, rotate these 2 stars in, and try and fight back to either tie or take the lead. We have seen far too often Kentucky struggle and slip and crumble whenever these 2 players are not in the game making an impact. And I understand sometimes that fouls will prevent these players from being in. It will not prevent them from getting into the game at the very start. I understand the argument that some players are more important if they are on the court at the end of the game relative to the start of the game. And I would like to sit here and argue that the most recent game Kentucky played against Texas A&M is a prime example as to why Kentucky needs to make changes heading into the NCAA tournament to their starting rotation. This team, I think on offense, has solid chemistry. I think this team on defense has a lot of work and things that they would need to do, borderline some of it being miraculous, to make an impact in the tournament. Like I'm saying, like if they change the lineup, I don't really think that it's going to do much on the defensive end. I also don't think it's going to do much on the offensive end. I'm going to pull up here a statistic from Sean Venzel at Hoops Insight on Twitter/X. And he said this after the A&M game, and I just want to throw it out here. Kentucky won two-thirds of the Texas A&M game, where Reed and Rob were both in despite turning the ball over on an uncharacteristic 25% of possessions. Lead into them, plus Reeves, to take you as far as they can. That's where Kentucky has built their wins. In case you do not know, Kentucky, 21st nationally in turnover percentage on offense, 14.2%. They don't turn the ball over. They shoot the ball well from inside and outside the arc. If you put your three best guards into the game to play with each other collectively for the majority of the contest, they are going to produce results. Even when they struggle, they're going to produce results. We have seen it not just in the most recent game, but in games throughout the entire season. Foul trouble or not, these players need to be on the floor for Kentucky to have their best chance to win the game. Rob Dillingham, currently right now, has exceeded, well, I say currently right now, there's nothing else he could do to change this positively or negatively, I think. He has far exceeded any sort of expectations that I had of him personally coming into the season. I thought he was going to be really good. I said back in April of last year, I thought he was going to be the lead guard. I thought he was going to be the stud. But I didn't think he was going to be this good, not this efficient. Shooting almost 45% from three, leads the team with a 30.5% assist rate that's top 65 nationally. That's really good. He is extremely dominant on possessions that he's utilized and extremely effective. Antonio Reeves, shooting 44% from three. Really good. Reed Sheppard, top 5 in the nation in true shooting percentage, leads the country in three-point percentage. Those three dudes need to be on the floor. And people may say, what about the defense? The defense has not been good, regardless of whether or not Kentucky throws out Reeves, Wagner, Sheppard, Mitchell, Dillingham, Edwards, or a traffic cone. It literally has not mattered what they put on the floor. It has just not been effective. But the offense and the team as a whole has been proven to be better when those guys are playing the most minutes. They, therefore, should start to prevent Kentucky from having to dig themselves out of holes in this NCAA tournament, because that's what's going to lose them a game. They're going to get to the Sweet 16. They're going to find themselves up against a really good opponent, and they are going to lose that first 5 to 6 minutes of the game, and it's going to be a battle for the rest of the way, and they're going to end up losing because they fell short early. The gun sounded, they went to run, and they tripped over themselves, and it was a struggle to catch up for the rest of the way. We saw that against A&M, and I'm telling you, unless Kentucky makes changes to how they utilize these players, it's going to happen again. They have to make a change. This is the tweak that Kentucky basketball needs to make in order to give themselves the best chance to win in the NCAA tournament. I'm not sitting here guaranteeing that it's going to make a difference and they're going to win the national championship, but it's going to give them a better chance. And the reason we know that is because it has happened so many times this year. And I'm sitting here kind of exasperated because we are what? We are 31, 32 games into the season. We've got potentially one more game left. Now is the time. There is no other time to make a decision like this. Now. You have to make the choice now. Let me know if you agree. I know some of you've got some differing opinions on this. Let me know in the comments below or on the socials at LockedOnUK on Twitter. Should Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard start for the Kentucky Wildcats, or should they not? Leave that in the comments below or again on the socials. I'm talking here about Kentucky's draw, talking here about how Kentucky, will run into a team that may be pretty difficult for them to outgain at the beginning of a game just because of how good the opponent is. And we had a listener question earlier this week about how Kentucky's region and how the bracket, how I would have seeded it. I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction here. I'm going to do that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if their first bet of $5 wins. That is $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. So we've gone through the stats here. We've gone through the opinions. And we'll go through a listener question that I got from Clint Darden, longtime listener of the show, asked how I would have seeded this bracket if I received all of the same teams for the field. So if I got all 68 teams that are in the actual bracket, how would I have seeded it? Because it is extremely lopsided, in my opinion. I think a lot of other people would agree with that. And there's probably going to come a segment later on this week where I talk about how maybe things could have been restructured. I know that some of you are more focused on, okay, what's happening with Kentucky. Some of you want to talk about with what's happening kind of with college basketball as a whole. I'm going to kind of mix that here a little bit just for today. I'm going to talk about how I would have seeded Kentucky's region, not from a perspective of what's fair, but from a perspective of how easy things could have been for the Wildcats. Because as I previously said yesterday after the selection committee threw out their bracket, the East region extremely lopsided relative to the rest of the bracket. I think Kentucky's region is probably the second most difficult. I think some analytics sites actually would probably agree with that. Not saying that with 100% accuracy. Something that I could do research on as we get closer to Thursday. But this is how I would have seeded Kentucky's region to be the easiest possible. And you're going to see here in some of these seed lines, Kentucky actually caught a pretty solid break, at least in my opinion. Now, Kentucky may end up playing some of these teams, and the matchup may be significantly more easy or harder than I originally anticipate. But this is how I would have done it. If I'm just giving Kentucky the best possible seed in their bracket. We'll start here at the top. The 1 seed. I think North Carolina is your weakest 1 seed because of their lack of consistency in close games. I've talked about this over on my Substack, and I think that it's pretty apparent, despite having some really, really good guard play, a really great defense to boot, they just sometimes have slipped up. And they showed that again in the ACC tournament against a NC State team that had to fight and claw their way to get there. I think North Carolina, relative to other seeds in this bracket, Houston, UConn, and Purdue, I think that they are the weakest. If I had to choose another 1 seed, I would have chosen Purdue, then I would have chosen Houston, and then I would have chosen UConn. North Carolina, I think, would have been my choice for the 1 seed if we're just picking the weakest seed here. The 2 seed I would have gone with is actually Marquette. I would have gone with them out of the Big East. The Big East, according to the committee, and shockingly according to different metrics, is not as, from I think the halfway point down, nowhere near as strong as some people would like to think it is. And that's coming from somebody that loves Big East basketball. really, really like Big East basketball. Super fun. But maybe the top three teams that actually made it in, are they, minus UConn, are those two teams as good as we think? Should there have been a case made for Seton Hall or St. John's? I don't really know. If you're looking at a team like Marquette, who has played those teams and either won/struggled against some of them, how good are they really? Shaka Smart, with his historical trends, how far is he going to go in March Madness? They've got a matchup with a 7-seed Florida that I think could really take them out. I would have picked Marquette to go up against somebody like a Florida, like a Colorado. I think Kentucky really did get lucky here relative to another 2-seed like in Iowa State, like in Arizona. I think that those two would have been very difficult. Tennessee would have been my other choice here, just simply because Kentucky beat them most recently. Tennessee struggling, obviously, after their loss to Mississippi State. Just a weird vibe around them and Rick Barnes. They also have historical issues in the tournament. So Marquette, North Carolina. My 4-seed would have definitely been Alabama. They have completely fallen off the wagon to end the season here. Defensively, worse than Kentucky. They give up a ton of fouls. They really struggled to protect the rim. Kentucky dominated them the last time these two teams played. Alabama would have been my pick. Kansas would have been second because of their injuries / their inconsistencies. Is Kevin McCullough really going to be able to go? Kentucky's already played them close once before. I think if you gave them a second shot, Kentucky would win that game. Kansas would have been my second pick. Duke, and then Auburn. But if we're going just at the top here, North Carolina, Marquette, Alabama. The 5-seed, I wouldn't change. I think Wisconsin would have been the team that I would have picked to make that 5-seed. I think Wisconsin's a little overrated at that 5-seed spot. Don't think I would have had them on the 5-seed line if I were the one seeding this tournament. San Diego State, Gonzaga, and St. Mary's, all different teams that provide different matchup issues that I don't think Wisconsin has. Sure, the Badgers went on the run there towards the end of the season before losing in the Big Ten championship to Illinois. I'm just not buying in. I just don't think that this is a team that would whip Kentucky. I think if you're relative to the other 5 seeds, I think Wisconsin could absolutely win the game against UK, but the others give me more pause. 6th seed would have been Clemson or Texas Tech, the team that the Wildcats got. Texas Tech has been injury-prone throughout the entire season, really struggled with that, but they've also got a pretty solid roster overall. Clemson, I think, is a little overrated at that 6th seed line. They've got a couple of really good three-point shooters, but I just do not see the hype. And the Tigers, these are all teams, by the way, that could still beat the Wildcats. I mean, they could still go on a run in their regions. Just on paper, this is just kind of how I feel about them. That would be my 6th seed. Probably I would choose Clemson or Tech. 7 seed, I would have chosen Dayton or Texas as the 7 seed for Kentucky. Florida, I think, is the most difficult 7 seed, and I don't think that there's a ton of argument against that among people online. Washington State is good, but not great. Dayton, I don't think Dayton's actually won a single game against anybody in the tournament field. Texas, I just do not think is very good. Florida, as we have seen firsthand, made the SEC championship. I think Florida is pretty dang good. I think they are good, almost a good football team. I think they're a good basketball team. Mississippi State would have been my choice for the 8 seed. Michigan State would have been my choice for the 9. I think Kentucky got the toughest 9 seed in Texas A&M. My 10 seed would have been Virginia. Everybody would have chosen that for their region. Everybody would have chosen Virginia. Colorado, I think, is the toughest 10 seed. So 7, 9, and 10, I think, are the toughest choices Kentucky could have gotten in the region. 11 seed, Oregon or Duquesne. 12 seed, UAB. I would have chosen Vermont or Yale as the 13 seed. Vermont playing Duke in Kentucky's region. 14 seed, and this is one I think that matters the most, and I hate to be on record saying this twice, especially if Kentucky finds a way to lose to this team, which just has me so stressed out right now. Oakland, I think on paper, is the weakest 14 seed. That does not mean that Kentucky is going to blow them out of the water. They could still get upset. That could still happen. We all know what happened with St. Peter's. We do not have to talk about it. But if we're just looking on paper, statistically, Oakland is the weakest of the other 14 seeds. You look at Morehead State, Akron, and Colgate. Obviously, none of these teams are like phenomenal, but I think that Oakland would have been my choice if I had to pick. And I really, really hope that the Wildcats don't lay an egg, because on paper, they should win this game. 15 seed would have been Long Beach State. 16 seed, I don't think matters. Watch a 16 seed win this year. Shout out Stetson, shout out Longwood, Grambling State, Montana State, Howard, or Wagner. And that is how I would have seeded Kentucky's region if I was just going for what I think is the easiest region possible. So let me know what you think about it in the comments below. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.